Normally I record about an hour of gameplay footage for these episodes. That's my compromised time for coverage of game mechanics and still having enough time in the day to record commentary and edit the episode. For Contra, I wound up only recording about half an hour. And that's because I'm really good at it. I used to be able to clear the US version without dying. I don't play it often enough these days to stay in practice, though. There are enormous differences between the NES and Famicom versions of Contra, and they mainly come down to Konami's VFC2 mapper chip. In fact, Konami advertised the features of the VFC2 chip in the magazine ads for Contra. No, I don't know what vibrating VRAM is either. Nintendo had a requirement that only they could manufacture cartridges for NES releases, and so custom chips by other manufacturers couldn't be used. The VFC2 was more advanced than anything that Nintendo had available, so the game was scaled down for the US. The Famicom version has improved graphics, more animation, better sound, cutscenes between levels. It's an all-around better package. The title's another example of Konami mashing up random kanji to get whatever word they wanted. In this case, the title consists of the characters for Soul, Ladle, and Silk. So I have no idea how you'd resolve that into a coherent title. Contra was originally an arcade game, though it's completely overshadowed by the home port. The Famicom version rearranges the levels and changes how the weapons work, and as Contra became a series, the home version is the path that the games followed. The story is that in the 24th century, a meteor crashes into an island in the South Pacific. A few years later, a terrorist organization called Red Falcon establishes a base there. To take them out, Commandos Bill Reiser and Lance Bean are sent in. Contra is the definitive run-and-gun. There have been run-and-guns before it, but nobody's done it better before, and afterwards everyone's going to be chasing it. The action is fast and the controls are tight. A good example of that is how you can use the extreme amount of air control you have to dodge things with your jump. There's a few places, particularly later on in the game, where the jumping is really tight, but it never feels onerous. There's no pixel-perfect movement required here. There are only 8 stages in Contra, and that does mean it's a pretty short game. However, it is genuinely difficult. But for the most part, it's a fair difficulty. If you take your time, you can see what's coming and react to it. That said, the bullets flying at you are sometimes hard to spot, and there's a bad tendency for some enemies to just fire a continuous stream of shots that don't really give you an opportunity to get through them. On the first-person view stages, though, you can always duck to avoid bullets. Knowing that trivializes the stages. What people really remember about Contra are the weapons. Well, that and the movie ripoffs. Even on the Famicom, where they didn't trace Schwarzenegger and Stallone for the cover, that egg is definitely taken from somewhere. But the weapons. All of them can be enhanced by picking up the R. That makes your bullets travel faster so you can get more shots on the screen. And now, because this is a YouTube video, I'm counting down the top 5 weapons in the original Contra. Also, there's 5 weapons in Contra. Number 5. The basic Peashooter. Obviously, the gun you start with is going to be the worst. But you don't know how bad until you get to the tank on stage 5. Without the R pickup, you cannot destroy it before it kills you. With the R pickup, you kill it 2 frames before it kills you. So the Peashooter is automatically the worst just because you have a forced death for having it. Number 4. Fireball. In a lot of cases, I'd actually prefer having the Peashooter to the Fireball. It's a very slow shot, and the only advantage to it is that it sometimes curves around obstacles. So it's highly situational, and that situation doesn't come up very often in Contra. Number 3. Machine gun. This is the obligatory controversial pick. There's nothing wrong with the machine gun, though. It works well as an upgrade to your initial gun, and rotating your shooting angle as you move gives it a kind of spray. All in all, a solid pick. Number 2. The laser. The laser tends to catch a lot of flack, because people didn't know how to use it. Pressing fire shoots one stream of the laser, and pressing fire again resets it. If you're using a rapid-fire controller, that means you just get a tiny little burst out the end. On the other hand, if you get good, it shoots a stream of absolute death. This used to be my favorite weapon in the game. You have to have some skill to use it, but it just melts bosses away. When you need high damage output, and are good enough that you don't have to just fire wildly, the laser's the weapon for you. Number 1. Spread. Well, of course it was going to be the spread gun. In the past, I thought of spread as a crutch for people who couldn't get good at the game. The kind of people who entered the 30 life code and then threw them all into a meat grinder and still had to use continues. But speedruns have demonstrated to me that spread can be the most effective weapon in the game. Unintuitively, getting up close while you have spread is the key to it. Do that, and you can do some real damage. Speaking of that 30 lives code, it's not in the Famicom version. On the other hand, you can hold up, left, A, and select as you hit start, and that's a level select code in the Famicom version. There's also a sound test if you want to listen to all of those rockin' VFC2 powered tunes. For that, hold down A and B and press start. Contra launched a franchise, although it was always more popular in the US than Japan. It gets one sequel on the Famicom, so we'll be seeing that one. That lack of Japanese popularity, and the enormous improvements between the US and Japanese versions, have actually made the Japanese version of Contra a bit expensive. I paid roughly $5 for my cart about 10 years ago, and these days it tends to go for around $60. I haven't even talked about the 2-player simultaneous mode. Unfortunately, I didn't have anyone here to play it with me. Probably for the best. I always tried to race them up the waterfall. Contra's one of the biggest games of the 8-bit era, and it really is that good. It's difficult, but it's not insurmountable. It pushes the hardware beyond its limits thanks to having that VFC2 chip. There's a lot of Konami games that I would call masterpieces on the Famicom, and you can make a really good argument that Contra is the best of them.